Hi, welcome to Gov Conversations. My name is Warren Linscott. I'm Vice President of Product Strategy and Management here at Deltek, and I'm joined by Kim Koster, Senior Director and Government Contracting Industry Specialist. Today we're going to be talking about what DCAA is saying to Congress. As most of you know, DCAA has been cracking down on government contracting over the last few years under pressure from the GAO, and so we want to understand a little bit more about what that's all about and what you can do as a government contractor to stay compliant and stay safe. Hi Kim, how are you today?
Doing well, Warren. Thank you.
Great. So can you characterize the compliance environment today and really what's going on and what's driving some of the change that we see in behavior in these auditing agencies?
Well, for 2013, DCAA was extremely busy. They had a very large backlog that they were clearing out, and they had examined approximately $160 billion worth of costs, and they did 6,200 audit reports. So that's quite an accomplishment for FY13. DCAA tracks a return on investment for every dollar that the taxpayer actually pays. So for 2013, that number was $7.30 for every dollar that the U.S. taxpayer paid that we get back. In comparison, 2011, it was $5.80. So DCAA is really increasing their value to the warfighter and to the federal government.
Well, that sounds like a lot of activities. Can you give us an idea of what happened within these auditing agencies that allowed them to call down some of the backlog?
It was absolutely a banner year for DCAA completing their cost incurred backlog. In 2010, there was a decision made, a very conscious decision made, to stop doing those cost incurred audits because they did not want to hire any additional DCAA employees. So they stopped doing that because they saw other benefits to other audits that would actually benefit the warfighter. So there was a very large backlog of cost incurred audits. In 2012, DCAA actually formed a cost incurred team. This team then was focused in, they were laser focused on getting these cost incurred audits completed. So 2012 we saw a big uptick. 2013, very large amount of clearing out of those audits. The other really big point to be able to get all those done was that they also did low risk sampling, and they were able to audit multi-years, so they were able to get more bang for the buck when they actually went in to do the audit.
So that sounds like a lot of different things for the auditing agencies to focus on, but they must have some priorities. As we see a drawdown in the overseas contingency funding and we see an uptick in funding in other areas, what do you think some of DCAA's priorities are going to be as we go into FY 2014 and beyond?
Well, I think we can look back, Warren, at 2013 to tell exactly what happened, and they told us exactly what their priorities are. Just let me give you just a little background. They actually look at those priorities based on cost risk, whether a subcontractor or a contractor has actually had poor performance before or not. And they also look at particular contract types where cost plus contracts, there's not necessarily the incentive to watch your cost. So those become the risk factors. In 2013, they really looked at two things. One was the overseas operations. So they really wanted to concentrate on that, a very large risk, and get those audits complete. The reasons for that is that those overseas companies, even though they're subject to our laws, they're not that familiar with it. So getting that information may be a little harder. There were also a tremendous amount of subcontractors that made up those contracts, those projects, and some of those were in country. So it's going to be harder and harder to find those companies and actually audit them. In fact, they may actually be gone. So that'll be a very interesting time for them in 2013, and I expect to see that same thing in 2014. The other emphasis was around forward pricing audits. And that continues. That's been continuing for a while, and we expect that to continue going forward. But what they're actually trying to do is keep costs from getting into the product before it's actually let to the government. So they stop costs before it actually becomes a reality. So very much concentrating on that.
So Kim, in the DCAA report to Congress, they talk about some inefficiencies in the audit process, and then they have some recommendations to how to correct those inefficiencies. So can you talk a little bit about what they are and what DCAA is planning to do or is asking the community and the government contracting industry to do, and how that might affect industry?
Well, one of the main challenges that DCAA has is proposal adequacy. But I would tell you that that's a challenge on both sides. So DCAA doesn't feel that they're getting enough information to really assess whether or not the cost is realistic or adequate or not. Well, on the flip side, government contractors feel is they don't have enough time to really pull all the information together, and some contractors are very limited on the information that they can actually get from their ERP systems. When you're having to support past performance, it's very hard if you can't get data readily out of your system.
It would seem to me that the government is moving towards a direction of purchasing smaller increments of work through task orders, and that gives the government contracting community less time to respond, 7 days to 21 days to respond to a task order. Is that having an effect in eroding the quality of proposals?
Oh, sure it is. 7 days is not near enough time to actually get an adequate proposal. So to me it becomes then a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you ask for something in 7 days, you're not going to get all the information that you need to do the job.
So that the way that the government is actually purchasing services and goods is having an impact on the quality of the proposals.
Exactly. And I think both sides really need to look at that and make a decision going forward on the best way to handle that.
Well, what are some of the other deficiencies that DCAA calls out and some of the other recommendations that they're offering up?
Well, DCAA would also like more information. Obviously, they want more information across the board. But they would like to have internal reports. So maybe internal reports about revenue or other things that companies have seen as proprietary in the past. They want those available. Now, there's been some move afoot to make them available, and it'll be very interesting to see whether or not getting that information actually makes them more efficient. The other thing that they'd like is they'd like to be able to get read-only access to the ERP system. I brought that up last year, and it causes quite a bit of motion on both sides. So government contractors don't necessarily want DCAA to have that information without any context. So they don't want them just sitting there mulling through numbers and not really understand why that they're there. But DCAA then, on the flip side, it would cost less because they would be able to pull all their own reports and look at the information in the way that they want to see it. The other thing that DCAA would really like is they'd love to have access to more employees. So they get access to the accounting staff, but they'd like to have information and more access to employees that may not traditionally be in the accounting organizations.
Well, direct system access sounds interesting, but then there's a training cost to that. DCAA will have to come up to speed on the various heterogeneous environment of systems that government contractors have. Who's going to pay the burden for that cost?
Well, that's true. And quite honestly, we know that the government contractor is going to end up paying that burden. So, that's something that the government contractors really need to think about as we move forward, figuring out what's going to be law or not.
Well, that definitely raises the cost of compliance, and we see that trend going on over the last few years. Having access to more employees, wouldn't that also raise the cost of compliance by having more people spend more time on an audit?
Sure. It's definitely going to cost more. And the more time that's spent, the more people that can be questioned. It also starts to make for more cycles, more questions, more time that you're having to spend defending or explaining your cost.
Well, great, Kim. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I thought it was very insightful to see what DCAA is up to and how to understand what's going to happen in the future from a compliance and audit perspective in the environment today. Thank you very much. And that's it for Gov Conversations.